The wind cut through the Mongolian desert like a blade of glass. Sand whipped across ancient stone hiding secrets older than any kingdom. Dr. Mara Vance knelt over a half-buried claw the size of her hand. Her scanner flickered then died. A shadow swept over her without sound. She looked up expecting a cloud, but the sky was clear. The ground pulsed once beneath her boots. In the distance a ridge shifted as if breathing. Then came the sound low and sharp like metal tearing. She had not found a fossil. Something had found her, and it was moving closer. Mara Vance had been in the field for 20 years and thought she understood the language of the earth. In her mind, the ground spoke through layers of stone, through dust caught in the fold of her gloves, through the dry whisper of fossils freed from the crust of time. She had worked in heat that cracked lips and cold that burned fingers. She had slept in tents during storms and mapped sites that no one would see again. Nothing prepared her for the Gobi in late summer. The desert was a vast expanse of ochre and gold. Every dune rolled like the back of some ancient creature frozen under the sun. Her camp stood on a ridge above a shallow basin littered with bone fragments. They had come here after satellite images revealed unusual formations. Most were sure they would find more of the well-known Tarbosaurus or Protoceratops remains. Mara was never so certain. The patterns on the images hinted at something different, something she could not name. She worked with a small team funded by a museum in New York. Harris, the geologist, could read rock like a book. Seema, the grad student, carried boundless energy and more notebooks than seemed possible. Their cook, Old Gone, was a local who knew the desert's moods. He often warned them of places the wind sang differently. Mara respected him for that, though Harris called it superstition. Each morning began with the grind of the generator and the hiss of the kettle. By noon, the air shimmered with heat. By night, the cold could bite to the bone. Mara kept her eyes on the ground most of the day, searching for shapes that broke the monotony of stone. Shards of fossilized eggs, the arc of a rib, the twist of a claw. 2 days before she found a claw in the hook scene, she noticed odd marks on a nearby ridge. Long parallel grooves, as if something heavy had dragged itself there. The sand around the marks was disturbed in a way that did not match the wind's usual touch. She took photos and measurements, then let the matter rest. Fossils sometimes shifted due to erosion. At least that was a simple answer. Old Gone grew quiet when she mentioned the grooves. That evening as the sun sank behind the dunes, he spoke to her in low tones. He told her of an old word his grandfather used, Halian So, which meant the silent hunter. According to the tale, it was a beast that moved without sound and whose shadow meant death for anything smaller. Mara smiled politely, but inside she noted how specific his description was. Old stories often had roots in truth. The next day, a storm rose from the south, without warning. The sky darkened, and the wind screamed across the camp. Tents rattled. Loose gear tumbled. Sand stung like glass shards against exposed skin. Mara stayed in her tent cataloging finds until the storm passed in the early evening. When she emerged, she saw that the ridge where she had seen the grooves looked altered again. A part of it seemed lower, as if collapsed. Or perhaps something had moved beneath it. She planned to investigate in the morning. At dinner, Harris argued that their real focus should remain on the basin, where they had found Protoceratops skulls. Mara listened, but her attention wandered back to the ridge. Seema asked if she was feeling well. Mara nodded, though her mind kept circling the same thought. The satellite images had not lied. There was something here that did not belong to the neat boxes of science she knew. Something watching. Something waiting. Morning light spilled over the desert in pale gold. Mara rose before the others and packed her field kit. The storm had left the air sharp and clear. She wanted to reach the ridge before the heat became unbearable. Old Gone noticed her early start, but said nothing as he poured water into the kettle. His eyes followed her as she crossed the basin and began to climb. The ridge was harder to scale than it looked. Loose stones rolled under her boots. Small gullies cut into the slope. At the top she crouched and studied the grooves she had seen earlier. They were deeper now, not eroded but pressed down as if by immense weight. Each track was over a meter apart. The stride suggested something tall and powerful. She traced one impression with her hand and felt the compacted sand almost like cement. No wind could do this. She followed the line of tracks along the ridge. They curved toward the far end where a tumble of boulders formed a jagged wall. Something about the arrangement seemed unnatural. She drew closer and saw that some of the stones were freshly displaced. Beneath them the sand bore more prints. They were three-toed like those of large theropods she had studied, yet wider and deeper than anything she had seen in fossils. A low vibration passed through the ground. It was faint but enough to make her pause. The wind was still. There was no sign of movement on the dunes. She told herself it was a truck on the far side of the basin, though she knew no vehicle could make the ground hum like that. She snapped several photographs, then stepped back. Her foot slid on loose grit and sent a small cascade of pebbles down the slope. The sound seemed to echo longer than it should have. Then came a smell, not the dry mineral scent of the desert, but something organic, a mix of musk and decay. It clung to the back of her throat. She swallowed hard and took a step toward the boulders. The shadow inside shifted, not from the sun's movement, but from something alive. A sharp call split the air. It was unlike any bird cry she had heard. It rose and fell in a metallic rasp that made her skin prickle. She froze. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadow inside the boulders withdrew with surprising speed. The vibration faded. The smell lingered. Mara turned and made her way down the ridge faster than she intended. When she reached camp, Harris was bent over a crate of plaster jackets. He looked up at her flushed face. "Find something?" he asked. She hesitated, then said she had found unusual tracks. Harris rolled his eyes but agreed to see them later. Seema was more curious. She asked detailed questions about the prints and the smell. Mara answered what she could, but kept the shadow to herself. She did not want to speak it aloud yet. Olgon brought her tea and said quietly, "Halian soul walks." His tone was not mocking. It was fact. That night the wind was calm, yet the camp seemed restless. Harris complained of hearing odd noises from the ridge. Seema thought she saw movement in the moonlight. Mara sat outside her tent with a small recorder trying to capture the sounds. Just past midnight, a distant rumble came from a ridge. Not thunder, not a vehicle, a deep rolling growl that faded into the silence. She listened until dawn, certain now that they were not alone. The neat lines of science had just blurred. Whatever walked the ridge was alive, and it was not small. The hunt for fossils had become something else entirely. The next day began without the usual rhythm of camp. Harris seemed distracted. Seema was scribbling in her journal, her eyes flicking often toward the ridge. Old Gone kept glancing at the horizon, as if waiting for something to appear. Mara tried to work, but her attention drifted. The photographs of the prints lay on her table. Each time she looked at them, the sheer size pressed into her thoughts. By mid-morning, she convinced Harris to join her in inspecting the ridge. Seema insisted on coming as well, carrying measuring tape and a field notebook. Old Gone refused to go, but handed Mara a small leather pouch. Inside was a strip of bone worn smooth with age. "Keep it close," he said. "It has seen many hunts." Mara slipped it into her pocket, though she did not believe in charms. Still, his sincerity made her hold on to it. The climb was easier with 3 pairs of hands. They reached the top, and Harris examined the prints without speaking. Finally, he said, "These are too fresh to be from anything extinct. The edges are crisp, no weathering." Seema measured the distance between impressions and frowned. "If this is an animal, it is massive, larger than any predator we know of today." Harris muttered about escaped captive reptiles or misidentified marks, yet his tone lacked conviction. They followed the tracks along the ridge until they vanished into the boulder pile. Mara showed them where she had seen the shadow. The smell was gone now, replaced by the dry scent of stone. Harris crouched to study the sand, but found nothing conclusive. "Could have been an illusion," he said. Seema shook her head. Illusions do not leave vibrations in the ground. On the way back to camp, they found a cluster of bones scattered across a shallow depression. Some were cracked open as if by powerful jaws. Others were stripped clean yet fresh. A few still bore shreds of flesh. The remains were not from livestock, but from wild animals, likely gazelle or small antelope. The scene carried a sense of violent efficiency. Mara took photos but kept her voice low. That night they posted a watch. Harris took first shift. Mara dozed lightly until it was her turn. She sat with a lantern turned low, the desert stretching silent around them. Hours passed without movement. Then a shape appeared at the edge of vision. She blinked, and it was gone. A faint rumble rolled across the ground. She gripped her flashlight, but kept it off. Whatever was out there, she wanted unaware. The rumble stopped. Minutes later, a piercing call echoed from the ridge. It was the same metallic rasp as before, only closer. Seema stirred in her tent. Old Gon emerged and sat beside Mara, without a word. They listened together until the sound faded. When he rose, he said softly, "It is searching." The next days brought more signs. Fresh prints appeared in the basin near the camp. The generator cables were found chewed through one morning, forcing them to ration power. A water drum was overturned during the night, leaving deep gouges in the sand beside it. Harris began arguing for leaving the site. Seema insisted they stay, calling it the discovery of a lifetime. Mara felt caught between their positions. She knew the museum would push for evidence, yet she also felt the growing weight of danger. On the fourth day, they ventured deeper into the basin to map new finds. While Seema sketched, Mara and Harris examined a half-buried fossil. The heat pressed down on them. Without warning, a shadow swept over the site. They looked up. Nothing was in the sky. The shadow had come from the ridge above. Loose gravel tumbled down toward them. Harris shouted for them to move. They scrambled as a rock slide tore through the spot where they had stood seconds earlier. When the dust settled, Mara spotted a massive shape retreating along the ridge. Its back carried a high sail of ridged spines, its head narrow and lined with teeth that caught the sun in brief flashes. She caught only moments of it before it vanished behind stone. Yet those moments carved themselves into her memory. Electrosaurus, alive. Back at camp, they argued about what they had seen. Harris refused to name it, calling it an unknown predator. Seema was ecstatic, already talking about cameras and proof. Mara said little, thinking of the way it had moved, silent, deliberate, as if aware of them and their tools. Old Gon only said, "You will not catch it. It will decide when you see it." That night a plan formed. They would set up motion-triggered cameras along the ridge and at the water drums. Seema took the lead on placement, while Harris handled the wiring. Mara kept watch with the rifle they carried for safety. Old Gon prepared strips of meat as bait. They worked until the sun dropped and the desert cooled. The first night brought nothing. The second, one camera captured a blurred shape, too fast for detail but large enough to block half the frame. The third night, the bait was gone from two sites. The meat hooks bent as if twisted by great force. One camera had been knocked over entirely, its casing dented. They began to realize they were not merely observing. They were being observed. On the fifth night, Mara took watch again. Around midnight, a faint crunch of sand came from beyond the last water drum. She raised her binoculars. At first she saw nothing. Then a movement, low, gliding between shadows. A tail, thick and muscular, swept once across the ground. She held her breath. The creature stepped into the moonlight. It stood taller than a man at the hip, its body sleek yet powerful. Its eyes caught the light and reflected it in pale fire. She could see the ridged back, the muscular jaws. It paused, scanning the camp with unnerving stillness. Then it turned and melted into darkness. She did not sleep after that. In the morning she told the others exactly what she saw. Harris went pale. Seema wanted to follow its trail immediately. Old Gon warned them again that pursuit would end badly. Yet the lure of proof was too strong. They decided to track it at dawn. The trail led them away from the basin into a narrow canyon. The walls rose steeply, casting long shadows. The air felt cooler here, damp in places where water seeped through stone. Tracks lined the ground, some overlapping. They moved deeper until the canyon opened into a hidden valley. Here the vegetation was thicker, scrub, small trees, patches of grass. It was a pocket of life in the barren desert. In the center lay the remains of a large animal, perhaps a wild camel. Flies buzzed over it. Nearby, fresh prints sank deep into the soil. The valley seemed to breathe with stillness. Then From the far edge, a shape rose among the trees. The Electrosaurus watched them, head tilted. For a moment it did not move, as if measuring them. Then it took a step forward, and the ground seemed to pulse. Mara's heart pounded. She knew they were standing in its territory. Every instinct told her to leave, but Seema raised her camera. The click shattered the stillness. The predator's eyes locked onto them. It stepped closer, slow and certain, the air thick with its scent. Harris whispered for them to back away. They did, step by step, until the canyon wall closed behind them. The Electrosaurus stopped just short of the open space. It made a low sound, a deep rumble that rolled through the ground. Then it turned and vanished into the trees, leaving them shaken and silent. Back at camp, no one spoke much. The boundary had been drawn. They knew now that the creature tolerated their presence only at its choosing. And they also knew that this was far from over. The morning began with a sky the color of steel. The wind carried a taste of dust, sharp and dry. Mara felt the shift before she saw it. Something in the air that made her skin tighten. Harris was silent over breakfast, his eyes fixed on a ridge. Seema had checked her cameras for the third time, muttering about battery life. Old Gone sat apart, carving lines into a stick with slow, deliberate motions. They had decided the night before to push further into the hidden valley. Seema wanted clear photographs. Harris insisted they would keep distance and avoid the trees. Mara agreed reluctantly, knowing the Electrosaurus had tolerated them once but might not again. By mid-morning, they were back in the canyon. The climb was quiet. Even the wind seemed to die in that narrow passage. When they emerged into the valley, the air felt heavier. The green of the scrub muted under the dim light. The carcass of the camel was gone. Only scattered bones remained, clean and pale against the soil. Seema set up her tripod near the tree lean. Harris scanned the ridge with binoculars. Mara walked the perimeter, eyes moving over every shadow. Old Gone stayed near the canyon mouth. He refused to enter further, saying he would not stand between the hunter and its ground. The first sign came as a shiver underfoot, a subtle vibration, as if a train passed somewhere deep underground. Seema froze mid-adjustment. Harris lowered his binoculars. The vibration grew stronger. Then came the sound, low, drawn out, the metallic rasp that had haunted Mara since her first sighting. It rolled across the valley like thunder. From the far side, trees shifted. A shape emerged, moving with that same deliberate grace. The Electrosaurus stepped into the open. Sunlight caught the ridges along its back, the muscles sliding beneath its scaled skin. Its head turned slowly toward them. Seema's camera clicked. The predator's gaze snapped to her. It began to move forward, each step precise. Harris hissed at her to stop shooting. She ignored him, adjusting her lens for a closer frame. Mara's voice came out sharper than she intended. Seema, enough. But the clicks kept coming. The Electrosaurus quickened its pace. Not a charge, but closing of distance that left no doubt of intent. Harris raised his rifle, though they had sworn to use it only in defense. The creature paused as if assessing the threat. Its eyes flicked between them. Then it gave a sudden bellow and lunged. Mara grabbed Seema, pulling her toward the canyon. Harris fired a warning shot into the ground. The sound cracked the air, echoing off the valley walls. The Electrosaurus halted for half a heartbeat, then veered to the side, cutting off their path. Its tail swept the ground, sending a spray of dust and pebbles toward them. Old Gone shouted from the canyon mouth. His voice carried words in his native tongue, sharp commands, almost ritual in cadence. The predator's head jerked toward him. That split second was enough. Mara shoved Seema toward Harris and sprinted to the side, drawing the creature's gaze back. She ran for the thicker scrub, heart hammering. Branches clawed at her sleeves. Behind her the ground shook under massive strides. She dove behind a boulder as the Electrosaurus crashed through the brush. Dust filled the air. She heard it sniffing, the sound wet and deep. Its shadow slid over the rock. From the canyon, Harris shouted her name. A shot rang out, not at her, but somewhere behind the predator. It turned sharply, giving her the chance to break from cover. She bolted toward the canyon, legs burning. Seema and Harris were waving her forward. Old Gon stood with flare in his hand, the bright red light hissing smoke. The Electrosaurus emerged from the scrub, its head low, eyes locked on the flare. Gon threw it toward the trees. The predator followed the arc, snapping at the burning stick. It recoiled from the heat, tail lashing. Harris fired another round into the ground between it and the flare. The creature hesitated, muscles tensing as if torn between fight and retreat. Then, with a final rumble, it backed toward the tree-line. Its gaze lingered on them for a long moment before it vanished into the shadows. The valley fell silent. They did not move for several seconds. Then Harris lowered his rifle and exhaled hard. Seema clutched her camera to her chest, face pale but eyes blazing with triumph. Mara looked to Old Gon, who only shook his head. "It let us live today," he said. "Do not mistake that for mercy." They gathered their gear quickly. The walk back through the canyon was tense. Every sound seemed sharper, every gust of wind a whisper of pursuit. When they reached the open desert, the air felt thin and raw. At camp, they spoke little. Harris began packing immediately. Seema argued they had proof now. Photos, tracks, eyewitness accounts. Mara said nothing, staring toward the ridge where the valley lay hidden. She knew the truth was more complicated. Proof was not the same as safety. The Electrosaurus was not a puzzle to be solved. It was a presence, ancient and deliberate, and it had marked them. That night the wind returned, carrying the dry scent of sand and stone. Somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the metallic call. The camp was a flurry of quiet motion. Harris stuffed gear into crates without caring about order. Seema sat by the generator, backing up her camera files to 3 separate drives. Old Gon kept watch toward the east where the ridge cut the horizon. Mara moved between them, making sure nothing was left behind that might draw attention. By midday the heat had grown oppressive, yet no one slowed. The sense of being watched hung over them like a shadow. Even the wind seemed to move in cautious bursts. Every so often Harris would stop and scan the horizon through a scope. Each time, he shook his head, but his grip on the rifle tightened. When the last of the equipment was secured, they loaded the trucks. The engine sounded too loud against the stillness. Old Gon rode in the lead vehicle beside Mara. Seema and Harris followed in the second. The tires left deep tracks in the sand as they wound their way toward the distant road. Half an hour into the drive, Mara saw movement at the edge of her vision. A line of dust rose far behind them. She kept her eyes forward, yet her pulse quickened. Gon noticed and said nothing. He only adjusted the small talisman hanging from the rear-view mirror. The route took them past the base of the ridge. Mara's gaze was drawn to the place where the canyon mouth would be hidden from view. For a moment she thought she saw a dark shape standing still against a stone. Then the truck jolted over a rut, and the shape was gone. They reached the paved road by late afternoon. The sudden smoothness under the tires felt like crossing into another world. Harris honked once in relief. Seema leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for the first time all day. Gon directed Mara toward a small roadside station where they could refuel and make calls. Inside the station, the air was cool and smelled faintly of oil. Mara used a cracked phone to contact a research base in Ulaanbaatar. She kept her report vague, speaking only of unusual tracks and the need for further study. The man on the other end promised to send a retrieval team for the crates. She did not mention the living predator. Harris approached her afterward. His voice was low but urgent. "We could publish this. The world needs to know." Mara looked at him and saw the fever in his eyes. She shook her head. "Not yet. We do not control what happens once it is out." He started to argue, but Gon stepped between them. "Some truths are not for everyone," he said. They stayed at a roadside lodge that night. The beds were hard, the air dry and silent. Mara lay awake listening for sounds beyond the walls. None came. She dreamed of the Electrosaurus not as a monster, but as a sentinel guarding something unseen. At dawn they drove west toward the city. The road unwound through stretches of barren land, dotted with low hills. Seema worked on her laptop in the back seat, cropping and enlarging the clearest images. She kept glancing out the window, as if expecting the ridgeback to appear above the dunes. Near midday, they stopped at a high overlook. From there the desert rolled away in waves of gold and shadow. Far in the distance, the ridge was a faint dark scar against the earth. Mara felt the pull to turn back, yet she knew they had pressed their luck far enough. As they prepared to leave, Seema handed her a printed photo. It showed the Electrosaurus in profile stepping into the clearing. Even in still form, the creature radiated presence. Mara slipped the photo into her journal and closed it without a word. The drive resumed. The ridge disappeared behind a swell of land. The sense of being watched faded but never vanished entirely. Mara suspected it never would. The Electrosaurus was part of that land in a way no map could capture. She had entered its world and walked away, but the exchange was not finished. By the time they reached the city, the sun was sinking low, casting long shadows over the streets. They unloaded the crates at the research base. Harris went to find a contact in the press. Seema headed for the archive to secure her data. Gone left without farewell, disappearing into the crowded market. Mara stood alone by the truck for a long moment. In her pocket, the photo seemed to weigh more than paper should. She looked east toward the desert, knowing the ridge was out there waiting. The hunt had ended for now, but the story was far from over. Back in the city, the noise of traffic and the hum of generators filled every space, yet for Mara it all felt distant. She walked through the narrow streets toward her small apartment, her mind still caught in the dry silence of the desert. The scent of dust seemed to cling to her clothes, no matter how many times she brushed them. She unpacked slowly that evening. The journals went on the desk, the worn boots by the door. At the bottom of her bag, she found the small talisman Olgon had left without a word. It was carved from bone into the shape of an eye. She set it beside the photo Seema had given her. Together, they seemed like pieces of a puzzle she was not meant to solve. Seema called later to say the data was secure in multiple locations. Her voice carried the excitement of someone who had touched history. Harris, on the other hand, left a short message saying only that he was following a lead. Mara guessed he was already speaking to someone who could spread the story. She knew she could not stop him, but she hoped the truth would not be twisted beyond recognition. Days passed, yet the sense of being connected to something vast and old did not fade. Mara returned to the base to catalog the physical samples they had collected. Most were ordinary stones and soil, but one piece caught her attention, a fragment of bone worn smooth by time. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight, and wondered if it had once belonged to the same creature that now walked the hidden valley. One evening she sat on the rooftop as the sun fell behind the city. The sky burned orange, fading to deep violet. In that moment the noise below seemed to dim. She imagined the Electrosaurus moving through the shadowed trees. Its steps measured its head, lifting to scent the wind. The image brought no fear, only a quiet sense of recognition. A week after their return, Seema arrived unannounced. She carried a sealed envelope and a look that mixed pride with unease. Inside the envelope was a larger print of the clearest photo they had taken. The creature's eye caught the light in a way that made it seem alive even on paper. If Harris makes this public, Seema said, it will change everything. Governments, corporations, poachers, everyone will come. Mara traced the edge of print and nodded. And the valley will die. They agreed to hold the images for now to keep the location secret. It was not an easy choice, but it was the only one that felt right. Some truths were too fragile for open air. That night, Mara dreamed again of the ridge. In the dream, she walked its length alone, the wind cold against her face. At the canyon mouth, the Electrosaurus stood, waiting not as a threat, but as a sentinel. It turned and vanished into the trees, leaving a clear path for her to follow. She woke before deciding whether to take it. Months later, life in the city returned to its usual rhythm, yet small reminders surfaced. A deep vibration underfoot during a minor quake, a shadow moving in the corner of her eye when no one was there. Each time Mara felt the pull of the desert like a quiet call. She knew she would return. Not soon, perhaps not even within the year, but the bond was set. The Electrosaurus was no myth, no fossilized relic. It was a living chapter of Earth's untold story, and she had stepped inside it. The ridge would wait, and the hunter would too. One evening, as she locked her office, she glanced at the horizon. The sun was gone, but the sky still held a thin line of gold. For a moment she thought she heard it. The metallic rasp carried on the wind, faint yet distinct. She smiled to herself, knowing that somewhere far beyond the city, the guardian of the valley still walked, and it remembered her,